Do you know how to keep from freezing in the event that you have a short-term emergency, like you're stranded by the side of the road, or the power goes out in your home in the middle of winter? Well, today we're going to interview Jim Phillips, who just happens to be an expert on this subject.
And my wife says I might have to think about wearing long pants.
Right?
Really?
Don't you think, right?
Hey, Provident Preppers. Today we are really excited to have Jim Phillips on again. Jim is an expert in all things preparedness, but especially when it comes into surviving cold, freezing temperatures. And as we're looking at winter, that's really what we need. And so we're excited to have Jim here, and we're going to break this video into two different segments. The first one is going to be how to handle cold weather during emergencies, something that is short term. The second video is going to address more long-term solutions for cold weather and for freezing winters that we are dealing with right now.
And Jim's going to talk to us about a variety of different situations. Maybe you're at home in some situations. Other times you're on the road, you're in travel mode, or you're visiting with others. So we're going to hopefully just talk about a whole variety of scenarios that you might encounter. Now, Jim, I may be getting old, but this winter has seemed colder than most to me. It has been really cold, and it really has brought home to me the importance of how we stay warm and how we protect our families and our loved ones in these kinds of situations. So why don't you lead in and talk to us a little bit about some of the basic principles and things that we need to understand.
Okay. And when we're talking about the short-term emergencies or long-term, actually the principles are all the same, although you may use them a little bit differently. What I'd like to do is share with you some of the key principles for winter disasters, emergency preparedness, because once you understand the principles, you can apply them to any situation. So that's why I like to come at it from a principle standpoint. So let's say the first one right here. This is kind of a fundamental one for everything. I call it the law of provident living. Just very briefly, it has 4 parts to it. And those 4 parts are spiritual attitude, knowledge, and then stuff. And I can spend hours on that one. I think you know that. But just briefly to say that the things that are most important for you is why you want to do things, why you want to learn. It's what your attitude, what your knowledge is. And the stuff comes along eventually, but what you really need to have in place is an understanding of how and why things work and how you develop an attitude that says, I'll make it. And then you get the right things at the right time and apply them in the right way. So that's kind of the fundamental law. The next one we want to think about in this knowledge and understanding, that's where I try to spend most of my time, is in the laws of physics. It's how the world actually works and why it works. Now, we're not going to write formulas and we're not going to do equations and things like that. We're just going to understand these principles relating to the cold, human safety and well-being. And one of these is very simply, whether you're in a structure, whether you're just out on your own, and it's how you retain the body heat. You want to retain the heat, preserve the heat. And then what you want to do is, of course, you need to release moisture. And that's the thing that most people don't understand, particularly in clothing. So we talk about that in depth and different ways to do that. Then the other one you need to understand is about this laws of human physiology, because you see it's the body interacting with the cold and how it's affected by the cold. What happens when it is cold and becomes cold? How do you take care of that? And in these areas, the key ideas that you have to worry about is the core. What's the core? How does the core operate? You've got the extremities, the fingers, the toes, the hands, the feet, all those things, and they all operate differently. You've got the circulation in the body, which is so important for our warmth. Then you need to know a little bit about cold injuries, what they are, how do you prevent them, and what do you do if you get one? Of course, prevention is much better. Metabolism comes into play in this, and then a part of the metabolism is nutrition. Winter nutrition is very, very important, and it's different in some cases than the summer nutrition. Then we come to another one, and that's about the behavior, about how we think. It's about our outlook on those things. It's how and why the mind and brain works. And particularly when you find yourself in unfamiliar, difficult, and threatening situations, because if you lose your attitude, you can lose your life. So we're talking about attitude, about the outlook, about the emotions, about fear. The internal communication, what do you say to yourself when you're talking to yourself? Your emotions, your beliefs, and then also the spiritual roots that you would have. That's a very important part of it. And then we come down to this idea of the community and tribe, because we need each other in emergencies and disasters. We need each other and they need us. So it is about community. That's the importance of the community. And when you would want to have a community, why you develop a community, how you do that, where you might in fact do that, and then who's going to be in it, who will be a part of it. Because you can have a planned positive community, that's what you're looking for, or you can have an accidental ersatz thing that you're thrown into, and there it becomes to the benefit of the strong, and the support groups can be kind of scary. So you really want to have something that's much more positive. And this is my definition of community very briefly. And the idea is to become a self-reliant household that's interdependent within a self-reliant community. And so it becomes a unified body of individuals bound together through agreed upon common attitudes, character, interests, needs, fellowship, participation, work ethic, and commitments to the positive benefit of all. And that's why you have to do it ahead of time and you plan for it. So all of those things play a very important role in this idea of how am I going to get through a short-term, long-term, something that's catastrophic. What do we do to make it through?
So that's really, as you think about it, I loved what you said about community, about how we need to be the self-reliant households, right? We've got to be strong individually, but we'll never be strong enough individually if we can't support each other.
You can't own, do, and have it all is what it comes down to. You just can't know it all. And I know an awful lot of things, particularly winter is one of my specialties, but there's a whole bunch of things, especially outside of winter, that I need help with. So I can be a resource to people. They can be a resource to me. That's how it works in the long run.
I think that's great. So let's talk about the emergency situations. What kind of emergency situations could we experience in the winter?
You name it, right? Okay. Well, there's one now. Let's talk about kind of 2 years ago down in Texas and in the South. We think about Texas because there were a lot of people had a really hard time. Now, there they were at home, but they lost their utilities. They lost power. And when you lose power, it takes everything else out. Now, short term, usually it's short term. It may be a few days, maybe a week in most cases. And then if you have the extreme cold as they did, and they were not prepared for that cold, that's not something they see except every 50, 60 years. And so people forget. And so what would you do in that kind of a situation? Now, if you're listening to this, you're thinking about these things, you're actually better prepared than a lot of those people were because they didn't have a clue about what do you do. They just don't get cold. So what you want to do is where we talked about the laws of physics, and the one of those that we talked about is you want to retain body heat. Well, how do you retain body heat? Well, you can do it inside of a warm structure, or I wrote an article for a blog that was on another website about what would you do if you get in this extreme cold like that and you're not prepared to deal with it. What can you find in the house to take care of it? First off, I said something about attitude. You've got to adjust your attitude very quickly. And the premise of my article was to say, don't think that you're going to have a warm house unless you've set it up and you kind of live off grid right now and you take care of yourself. If you're on normal utilities, you're not going to have a warm house. Get over it. What you're looking for is a less cold house, a house that's out of the wind, out of the snow, a place where you're sheltered in there. And then what can I do to have a less cold space in there? And what can I do to keep my body warm? Because frankly, it really isn't about your house. Your house doesn't care. Now, the goldfish cares, and the geraniums care, and the water pipes care. So you need to take care of them, whatever you need to do. The pipes, just drain them down so they don't freeze and burst, because that causes lots of problem. And then it comes down to, what do I do to stay warm? Well, we want to retain heat. What do we do? Well, insulation. So what you're doing is looking around, if you're a house or if you're in a car or in a plane or a snowmobile or wherever you are, that you can find things that will help insulate you, retain the heat. Now, in the house, we all know, well, we got blankets, we've got coats, and you just put everything on. And we're used to walking around in shirt sleeves, in our nice warm houses. Well, now it's not going to be a warm house. It's going to be a sheltered house that's less cold. Put on a sweater, put on a coat, get over it, is what it comes down to. Now, one of the things you have to think about when you have some of this big loose clothing on, because everybody wants to have, well, some heat or some fire, so you light candles and you have little gas stoves and things like that. Now you got these big baggy sleeves on and everything. You got to be careful about reaching across one of these things, particularly with children, because they don't think about it. So now fire, anytime you have an open flame of any kind, it becomes a hazard. So be very careful about that and take care of, if you're going to cook some food because you have a way of doing that, you're going to be getting some heat from that. Well, take advantage of that heat. How do I take advantage of that heat? Let's say I've got my kitchen. I have one of these little countertop propane stoves I can put up so I can heat some water and make some hot chocolate or something. Well, that thing is not going to be able to heat your whole house. Or so what you want to do is say, well, I want a smaller space. Now, maybe you can go into another room. Maybe you have a kitchen dining room that you can close off. But if you don't have that, hang up plastic sheet, blankets, curtains, things like pin them up, stick them up, tape them up. So now then I've decreased the space for the little bit of heat that I have that comes off from my body and may come off from a stove or a candle. So now I'm going to be trapping some of that heat a little closer to me, because remember, it is retained body heat. One of the ways that you retain body heat besides clothing is you go to a space that's warmer than, say, in the cold weather, so that you don't lose heat as fast as you can. So you retain it better. So you're thinking about how these things work. So have a smaller space. Now, that works well for at night too, because, well, one of the things you can do, let's say you do some regular camping, well, you can get out one of your tents. If you have a tent that you can set up in the house, so you set it up in the house, you get your sleeping mattresses and bags in there. So now you have this sheltered space, and you have a small space within that where that little bit of heat that leaks off of you in the night is going to be held a little closer to you. So you see how this kind of works, where you're building up these shells around you so that you'll be more comfortable. None of them are going to be warm. They're going to be less cold. If you think that way, it'll help you. Now, you have some of the little buddy burners and the propane stoves and things. Those are great, and they'll do what they will do. But now you have to be very careful about using them, because if you're getting into these smaller and smaller spaces and they're sealed up a little bit more, you have a problem with oxygen, getting enough oxygen for you to be okay, and then not having too much carbon dioxide build up or carbon monoxide. So the safest stoves or burning things that you would use in a house would be things that are on propane, natural gas. Oh, those would actually be the best. Anytime you're burning anything else, kerosene is the next one on the list. Never, ever, ever use one of these appliances that runs on gasoline or white gas. Those produce copious amounts of carbon monoxide. So natural gas or propane or butane, these are safe to use inside. As far as carbon monoxide is, that's very poisonous, very toxic to you. But you're still going to be consuming oxygen and producing carbon dioxide. And so you have to be sure you have enough ventilation. Well, the problem with ventilation is that brings in cold air. So there's this balancing act, unless you have the appliances that are vented to the outside that can get the fumes outside. So you want to be very conscious of that, because every year we have people die trying to heat with white gas stoves, propane heaters in a tight enclosed space inside of vehicles and things. They use up the oxygen. They have too much carbon dioxide or too much carbon monoxide, and they end up dying. So this is where the ultimate answer to all of this is kind of where we started, is it's your clothing. It's having clothing, winter clothing that you can put on. And the bottom line is, when you think about the laws of physics, it is the thickness of the clothing. It is having big, puffy, thick things on that trap air. The skinny ski clothes that have the racing stripes on it so you'll look sexy on the slopes or whatever it is, or macho, forget those. You want fat stuff. One of the simple rules when I'm teaching the classes on this, if you want to be warm in winter, taking care of yourself either in a building or outside or wherever you are, you're going to have to look fat. Just look fat. And just get used to being that it's okay that you're going to put on this thickness, because that's how you retain heat. There are some things that can be done short term to boost the warmth of thin things. And we have people that promote thin insulation. They have thin in the name sometimes. And there's things they do by not allowing the moisture to escape as well, because when you retain the moisture, you're going to generally retain some of the heat. And so what they want to do is trap them in with vapor barriers and things like that. Well, in the short run, that helps, but in the long run, it's very harmful to you and your warmth. And then you can also use some reflective surfaces, the space blanket and the reflective mylar films and things. Those will help, but they're absolutely waterproof. It won't let the moisture get away from you. So you have this balancing act. You're trying to retain the heat, but get rid of the moisture that's coming off your body or maybe in the house. And why is moisture? Laws of physics. Why is moisture in your clothing insulation such a problem? Real simple. Moisture transfers heat 25 times faster than air. And the only thing that we're using for insulation is air, trapped, stabilized, dry, non-moving air, dead air space. Little pockets, little bundles so it can't move around. Get them close to your body. And the best insulation would be these closed cell kinds of things like styrofoam and things. They're very good insulators, but they won't allow the moisture to get away from your body. Or some of the neoprene rubber that's foamed and what have you, like wetsuits and things. Well, they retain heat pretty good because these little bubbles don't allow the air to move, but they trap the moisture next to you, and you'll end up, stewing in your own juices after a while, and it's very harmful to your body to live wet for more than just a short period of time. So we don't want waterproofing around us, but we want to release the moisture while retaining the heat. So there's a real balancing act into this that I go into depth in the classes, but I want you to start thinking about it. And in particular, people should experiment, try some things before the emergency happens. Get out your stuff, go out on the front porch, sit out in your unheated garage or wherever it is, or go out and recreate. Go out on the picnic table and have a meal sitting out there. And then if you're in your clothing that you thought was going to take care of you and it's 10 degrees and now you're freezing after 15, 20 minutes sitting still, your clothing isn't good enough. The weather isn't the problem. One of the principles I try to teach people is there's no such thing as bad weather. Bad weather does not exist, but you can have bad clothing, and the bad clothing will get you in trouble. So what you need to do is don't blame it on the weather, get better clothing, get better experience, and so that you'll work better. Let's flip over into physiology for just a minute. One of the most important things you need to know about staying warm in the winter is hydration. You must drink lots and lots of water. Not soda pop, not fruit juice, not coffee, not anything else, not any kind of a beverage. A little bit of those things is fine, but they all take extra water for your body to process. And in your nutrition, in your well-being, the body physiology, one of the things that's very important is to stay properly hydrated. If you have a dry mouth, if you're feeling thirsty, you're going to be at least 3% down on your water, what you should have in terms of water. Now, as you get drier and drier, it'll be more and more than that. But at 3% loss of body weight and moisture, by the time you're thirsty, you're going to be down 3%. That already has a huge impact on your ability to stay warm, your metabolism. So it's extremely important that you have sources of water, that you make water. In fact, one of the main reasons you might want to have a stove or a fire capability, if you're in an area where there may be, in fact, snow on the outside, the water isn't working after a while, perhaps. Now then, what you need to do is melt snow and ice and then turn it into water that you can, in fact, drink. You may want to do that. Very, very important for you to do that, because if you're dehydrated, you're going to get cold. You won't be able to stay warm in your blankets in your bed. You won't be able to take care of yourself. So it's very, very important that you're taking care of your hydration. And then food is important after a while, but you can go actually quite a few days without eating anything. But if you go more than just a few hours without drinking and hydrating, it will impact you tremendously. So hydration is the key principle in nutrition. Stay hydrated first and then eat some stuff too.
So we have all this winter travel going on, right? And some of these roads, when we travel, there's long distances where there's nobody to help you. So we totally have our emergency kit, and we've got extra blankets, and we're ready for that. but teach us, like, what would you do if you're stranded out there for 24 hours in the middle of a blizzard? You can die.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
You certainly can. In fact, it happens every
Yeah.
year. You just watch the news. Usually it doesn't make national news. You know, the people that this happens to them in Minnesota. You probably won't hear about it unless it was a group of people or there was some extraordinary rescue going on. You won't hear about it. Every year we kill quite a few dozens of people. They get stuck stranded out there. They may be in vehicles. Well, vehicles can be nice because you say, well, I got an engine and I can run the heater. That can be good, but you do have to be careful about that because that engine is producing copious amounts of carbon dioxide and other combustion products. And if your tailpipe muffler or something is leaking underneath the car and or the wind is blowing in such a way that it carries it up underneath the vehicle and then it gets sucked into the vent fan or the heater fan, you can blow those things in there and they may not be strong enough that you smell them a whole lot. And after a while, your nose gets kind of used to it. And you can find out that you'll just end up, well, dead in your warm vehicle, perhaps. That's one of the hazards you have. The other one is if you're dependent on running that heater and say, well, I'll just run the heater and everything is right so that you can do it. But how long can you run it? How much gas do you have in your tank? And it's eventually going to run out. So one of the strategies is that you may in fact be running that heater for short periods of time. Just bring the temperature up a little bit and then cut it off so that you're saving the fuel for a period of time. You're trying to have a less cold vehicle, not a warm vehicle, a less cold. So it's an attitude if you think about that. It's not about being toasty warm all the time. It's about, I don't want to shiver. So I just need it so that it's good enough. Now, your emergency kit, extremely important. If you're traveling 2 miles away from home in the winter, depending on the conditions, that can get you in trouble. I have in my vehicle primarily things that insulate me. My clothing, and in this case, my foam clothing and those things, because I can sit around at, 0 degrees and not get cold for hour after hour. But the one thing you have to have, and this is what I'd ask people, be sure that you're carrying with you lots of water. Because even if you have all the blankets, all the insulated clothing and those things, you're inside of this car. And if you do not stay hydrated, you're going to start getting cold and eventually it will kill you or allow you to be more susceptible to hypothermia and frostbite. So hydration, again, is something. And then if you want to store it in your car, when I'm doing classes for people that are, driving the snowcats and things like that, then how do you store water in this vehicle that may be exposed to the cold? Well, you do it generally in a thermos bottle. Now, if you're in the really cold weather and you have a thermos bottle out there, it's not perfect and it will eventually freeze. So you've got to be changing out that water in the thermos bottle. And if you store warm water to start with, that helps. And it'll make it through 2 or 3 days of around 0 temperature in a car before it starts to freeze. But you have to be aware of that. Now, for me, I take with me jugs of water in insulated containers in the winter so that if I do end up in a cold vehicle, it's not going to freeze right away. So I take water with me all the time. That's what you're going to find most people have not put in their winter emergency kits is water. You need the water.
Very good point.
Of course, then you think of what do I need for the clothing? Well, I take care of my hands. Now, the head's very, very important to have hats, good insulated hats, to have of course, the body wear, the coats, the parkas. But something that most people don't do is we have a tendency to put lots of insulation on the upper part of the body because it's easier to put it on, and we don't do much about down below. So you just have your skinny jeans on, nothing down there, and you put on your puffy coat. The puffy coat will help, but you really need to have things that'll take care of your legs. In my kit, my emergency clothing and things, I have the underwear that goes on the bottom, and it goes actually inside my clothing. So I will very briefly just take off my outer clothes, my jeans or what I have, my cargo pocket pants, and I'll put on this underwear underneath that's a ½ inch thick. It has to be fat. It's made out of this foam material, and it insulates exceptionally well. And I just pull the jeans back on over top of it, and I can sit around, in a car that's 15 degrees and be perfectly happy as long as I have a hat. And I may, in fact, have some slippers or things, some warmer things I can put on my feet, and you have gloves for your hands. Now you think, that's a lot of trouble. Well, so is frostbite when you lose your fingers and toes. That's a trouble for the rest of your life. So is suffering in hypothermia for hours and hours. You may not get actually injured, but it's whole body pain in your face. You can't get away from it. And what happens when you get into hypothermia is that you don't think clearly, because as your body temperature goes down, your biochemical processes in your body slow down, and particularly your thinking, your reflexes, your reasoning, and you make mistakes when you're driving, when you're traveling, when you're walking, when you're skiing, when you're on a snowmobile. You go places that are dangerous because you're in a hurry to get away from the pain, and you're not thinking clearly about all the ramifications. This is where people get hurt, lose their lives in avalanches, and just getting lost, stuck out there, getting into hypothermia, and they can't take care of themselves. So you have to stay ahead of the curve. My whole class is on hypothermia and what it does to you. That's important for you to understand it. But just the wires are down. Your communication is down. You're not thinking clearly. Your reflexes are now slow. You can't move as fast. You don't think as fast, and that causes you to get in trouble too. So that's one of the reasons you're trying to stay reasonably warm, above shivering. Cool is okay, but shivering is not good, because as soon as you're actually shivering, you're honestly actually in hypothermia. Your body is trying to generate more heat by this shivering that you're doing, so that you'll warm up, because you and I live in a very narrow biological temperature range.
Yeah.
You need to create more heat or retain the heat. Shivering helps you create more, but you don't want to get to where you're shivering. That means you're starting into very mild hypothermia, but as it gets deeper and worse and the shivering gets stronger, now you're in trouble. You're really getting in trouble. You have to avoid that.
So let's say that we made it to grandma's house, but then when we're at grandma's house, we have a power outage.
And there's a
So
big
how,
blizzard.
when we're, sorry.
Yeah, there's a big blizzard. The roads are closed. You can't get out. You're stuck there at grandma's house. The power's off. Okay,
Yeah.
good. That's an enjoyable winter experience, as long as you have the right attitude about it. And one of the reasons, if you remember the law of provident living, is you develop an attitude by having knowledge about how and why things work, and you have some stuff with you. So when you travel into grandma's house, you should have your emergency kit with you in case you get stuck in a car. So at least you have that. And then at grandma's house, you can look around, the same idea that we talked about, into a smaller space. Do I have things that'll generate some heat? Be careful of your ventilation. Be careful of fire and things like that. How you're going to sleep. You know, here's one of the things we see in the old pictures and some of the old movies. In the castles and those places, we see the four poster beds, right? And we think that's a style. That's not style. See, those rooms and those bedrooms didn't have central heat. Central heat is a very new phenomenon in the past, 100 years. It started to come in the past 60, 80 years, very much so. What that is, they had curtains around them. They weren't curtains for privacy. They were insulated curtains, and that bed has a top on it. They made a little room so that their body heat that's leaking out, and when they're breathing, you're expelling some heat and everything. It's going to be trapped in that space, so that you'll have a less cold space around your bed and your blankets. So here again, that's the idea of setting up the tent or things like that, and getting down inside of that with your mattresses and sleeping bags and things, because it's going to be warmer than out in that unheated room. That's still warmer than being outside. So it's all good. Just think about it that way.
Okay, how about this one? The power goes out and you are stuck at your office that is 30 miles away from your home. What are you going to do there?
Well, here again, you should have an emergency kit in your car, and you can probably get down the stairs. Your elevator may not work. Go down the stairs. That'll warm you up. Get to your car, get the things out, bring them in. Now, some people may have a little bit of a kit at their office. One of the things that you should store at your office all the time is going to be water. You want to have water there, and since it's going to be not a freezing space most of the time, it can just be there. Some jugs, bottles of water that are in there, so you'll have them, because the water may be off in the building, and so now you can take care of your hydration needs. You probably wore a coat to work. That's good. Get your emergency kit out. Now let's say you weren't thinking about these things, or you rode with somebody else, and there you are in the office. Now you have to start looking around. What do I have that I can use? Now, if it's going to be a little longer term, one night you can just sit up all night in a chair, shivering and walking, and you can do side straddle jumps and push-ups, whatever you want to kind of get the temperature up a little bit. It'll be a long night, but you can't do that 2, 3, or 4 nights in a row. It won't happen. So once you've decided it's going to be more than just a few hours of shivering, then you have to start looking around like you would do at home or at grandma's, or if you're in somebody else's vehicle. What do I have around me that can insulate me? And the more serious the situation, then you start getting really serious about tearing things up. Now, if there's couches and cushions and things like that, well, there's some insulation. But here's the thing, that if you're a homeless person, I've been quote unquote temporarily homeless by choice. It's called backpacking and things like that. That's homeless, isn't it? But I'll say the homeless will know some things about using newspaper and cardboard. Newspaper and cardboard do and the reason newspaper is good because it's in big sheets. And the paper itself, which is very thin, doesn't trap a lot of heat in it. But what it does do is you lay more layers and layers on you. It stabilizes the air around you. And those layers that are trap stabilized non-moving air, they will help insulate you. This happened one time when we were on a trip and we got a really bad cold spell. It was in the fall. It wasn't supposed to be that cold, so our sleeping bags were not full winter sleeping bags. And there we were, and it comes out and it's way below freezing. It is cold, and the sleeping bags are not adequate. But what we did have with us, we had newspaper. So what you do is you take the newspaper or other paper, you crinkle it up in this case, because now you're trapping a lot of air. You're not trying to get it down to a tight little ball. I want it into kind of a puffy ball. So we take this new paper and we start stuffing it down inside our sleeping bags all around us, and there are these balls of paper in there. That adds insulation to you. Now, the only thing I can tell you about sleeping in a sleeping bag full of balled up newspaper is that ink is not permanent. And in the morning, you're kind of gray. You're just, you got some of it all over you, but it's okay. So what you're looking at, see, the physics is, I want to trap air. What can I do? And if you had to, and let's say you have just a thin coat or a jacket, well, in an office, there are not any really paperless offices most times. Somebody's going to have copy paper. Take that paper, wad it up into balls, start stuffing it inside your shirt and things like that. Yes, it's noisy, and yes, it's kind of weird, but it'll help insulate you versus just sitting around. So there's always things you can do. Now, in the long term, let's say you're going to be really stuck and it's really cold in a vehicle, and this could be the same thing in an office where it's going to be days and days and it's going to get cold. It's going to be well below freezing in that vehicle, in that space. Then my cushioned chair that I'm sitting on takes a whole different purpose in mind. That's why I always have a pocket knife. I'm going to cut that thing apart and I'm going to get to that foam that's down inside. And I'm going to make things that'll help me the most. Split some of that foam so I can pull it over my head. Yes, it's ugly, but it will, in fact, do a lot for you because we lose a lot of heat out our head. I may take some of those strips of foam and I may put them inside my clothing. That receptionist couch that's out there, it's like, and let's say you were trapped and after hours, and so there's not a lot of people there. Get to the couch, and it's going to be better to replace the couch than try to replace your feet if this is something that's serious and long term. This is especially true when you're in a vehicle, because it's like, no, you're really trapped then. And you're going to start cutting things up, and they're looking for, what can I do, pulling down inner liners and snowmobiles that have foam under them, the seat cushions that I can start cutting up and stuffing around me and things like that, because retaining body heat so that you'll stay warm enough is very important, because if you don't, you're going to get injured, you can die. So replace the seat, replace the chair, the couch, replace the bed, so you don't have to replace your feet. But in this process, be sure you're staying hydrated. That's one of the most important things you can do along the way, because if you're running in a little bit chilly and you're dehydrated, you're going to crash real soon. You've got to get the water in you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So did you have something you were going to say?
I was just going to say, bringing it home, it seems like the first thing that we need to do is recognize that this could happen.
Yeah.
And when we recognize that it could happen, then we can take some steps to both learn and, potentially acquire some things to help with that. So kind of sum this up real quick and tell us, How do we get there?
Well, education, of course, is the first most important thing that you've got to do. It's about learning about these things, learning how and why they work. That's what you really need to be doing along the way, is educating yourself. Now, there's a lot of people that do that. So what you've been sharing with people, what we're sharing here, that's help educate them, get them thinking. Now, when I gave you that long list of things, those principles, we just touched on those things briefly. And the idea is to get people thinking about them, so they're going to go like, well, what is it that I don't know? And what's my threat? How threatened could I possibly be? And even though you live in South Texas, it's like, well, sometime in the next 50 years or so, you might really need to be prepared. So get at least educated so that you'd know what to do in your house, and what you can find in your house that'll take care of it. You might set some supplies aside. So it's about just thinking ahead, carrying some supplies with you, getting them into the car. When I'm traveling in the winter, and even I may be traveling by plane, I've got things that I'm either wearing that are going to be more than I need in the plane, but a whole lot more that's going to be more of what I need if we should have some kind of an emergency and have to bail out of there in a storm. And if there's a forced landing, and if you make it through it, well, you got to have some stuff with you. Of course, you got all those seat cushions in there, and so you can start tearing things apart and cutting them up to do so. It's education that's critical. The laws of physics, the laws of physiology, the laws of how you think about emotion and things like that. That's what you want to get educated in, so that you can be prepared to deal with some of these things and not go like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I guess I'll just die. That's a bad attitude. Let me tell you, you don't want to be thinking like that.
Bad attitude.
Yeah.
Okay, Jim, so you've got a lot of classes on this. Why don't you tell us where our audience needs to go to take advantage of the knowledge that you have to share?
Well, what I can do real quick is share my screen again, because then maybe people will be able to remember it. One of the things is on my website, which is jimsway.com, there's a couple of things you can do. One thing is you can register for the newsletter, which is the Provident Living Times. That'll bring you to where I do classes every Wednesday night. I'm doing classes. Right now we're focusing in winter. And then if you can't come on a Wednesday night, then on my website, you can go into the library, go down to this purple button on here, which is Wednesday and Saturday classes, and they're all in there, my Wednesday night classes. I publish them in chronological order within a few days of when I do the Wednesday class. And right now it's focused on winter. You can get things there. Or you can go into, again, my library, but this thing right here that says clothing. Clothing is about cold weather and winter. So if you just click on that button and then scroll down, there's a whole series of, these are short videos. They're on YouTube and places here. There's links to them or where you can download them. But there's a class that you'd probably want to watch. It's in that same area. Yeah, disasters happen in winter too. And so those are things that you can do. And then I've got more classes in a subscription library. There's Winter Without Worries, which is a more than 20 hours long, digging into the laws of physics and physiology. What do you do about it? And being able to make specialized clothing. So there's lots of things I try to help people doing, but it's on my website. And attend the classes, get the newsletter, and then Saturday mornings I do an open forum Q&A. Come ask any in-depth question you want. If I've got the answer, I'll tell you, or try to give you an idea where to go.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you for sharing this information. This is absolutely vital information because cold is a serious threat. So thank you again. And now for our audience, question of the day. What are you doing to make sure you are prepared for cold weather? Wherever you live, what are you doing? Comment below. And thanks for being part of the solution.
And make sure that you check out part 2 of this, where Jim's going to talk about how to stay warm or how to stay not too cold during a long-term disaster.